Welcome to the second in our series of videos about how to use the Alexa presentation language. In the previous screencast, we covered audio capabilities, the APL aid, which is still in beta, and we showed you how to use simple text with a card, simple text with a standard card with a picture, simple text with emotion, and also simple text with background crowd noise. Today we're going to show you how to use the APL proper when you have graphic capabilities. And as always, the code will be provided. Just as an intro, my name is Brian Tarbox, an Amazon community hero. I also lead the Boston AWS users group. I've got a bunch of certifications, 10 patents, and various and sundry. So let's just move right on to the demo. Alexa, tell Tarbox Kaylee. And you have to remember to turn the device on. Alexa, tell Tarbox Kaylee grid list.
Welcome to Premier League. Press a button or scroll to see more options.
And you can see now we have a bunch of buttons that we could press, and these represent verbs in my actual Premier League skill. And you can scroll these and you can push buttons, and we'll push one.
The most used referees are Martin Atkinson with 22 yellow cards and 4 red cards, Anthony Taylor with 3 yellow cards and 17 red cards.
And we'll just go down and try another one with the volume up.
The players with the most touches were Kane with all of them, Son with some of them, and Vardy with the rest of them.
So right now, obviously, I just have some hard-coded responses. So now let's dive into Teams.
Here is the page of just teams.
And you can see that we've got all the teams that are currently in the Premier League. And it's a little hard to see, but you can, up here I've got radio buttons.
Okay, we'll show you team results. Aston Villa, results. Brentford, results. Okay, we'll show you team fixtures. Burnley, fixtures.
And that's basically it. But that shows...
This is the prompt.
That shows a much more engaging capability where you can just look for your various teams instead of having to remember the team names. And
welcome to Premier League.
In my main Prem skill, I faced the struggle of how to tell people that there were all these things you could ask. And so I have a complicated system of suggestions. But with this, it's right in front of you that you can do other things. This shows that you can run an Alexa skill on your big TV if you have Fire TV turned on. So now that we've seen what the skill can do, let's look how we created that. Okay, so here we are looking at the Lambda code, and these are the intent handlers that we discussed last time. Okay, but so now we're going to go down and look at what's called the grid list intent handler. What we were showing on the screen was a grid list, a grid of items in a list. Okay, and so the code, you start with your standard can I handle the intent, and in my real skill this will be part of the startup. But here, since I'm showing different types of options, I'm showing this just as an intent. So we get down to handle, and remember with the radio buttons, I had to know which radio button was pressed, because one of the options is you have all the teams, but you could ask about the team's form, the team's upcoming fixtures or the team's recent results. So I've got that radio button. So I've got a little bit of code here that shows you, that lets me save what that information is and has a default. Okay, now profile is kind of interesting too, in that right now there are several different types of Alexa display devices. There's the 8-inch show that we have over here. There's the 5-inch show. There's also the Fire TV. So, and they each have different sizes, and so they have different characteristics. And so I use this call to find out what kind of device I'm on, and then I set up a mapping of device type with aspect ratios. Okay. Then I have this important line, which is, geez, does this device even have a screen at all? Now, in my particular skill, this would already be checked, so I don't need to worry about this. But if we do have a screen, I get the data source, and I log a fair bit of information, especially initially. And then, just as we did before, we have our handler input, our response builder, something to say, and then the add directive. And this time we're adding an APL render document directive instead of an APL A render document directive. Now this is a little tricky, so we're going to jump up to our imports. And you see here we have render document directive imported from both APL and APL A. So I use Python's import aliasing so that I can distinguish exactly which one I want. And that's important because if you use the wrong type of render document directive, the system will basically give you a quiet no response with no logging, which is really kind of a problem. So I say I want an APL render directive. I've got a token, and that's important so that I'm telling the system, hey, this is who I am. If I then want to tell it another thing, which we'll see in a little bit, I have to pass that same token so it can figure it out. As before, I have my document is a link, and then we pass the name of the document that we've created. I set the data source, and then I fire off the response. And if I get here, that just means that I was running on a device that didn't have a screen. Okay, so let's look now at the document. Okay, so this is the main document, and you can see it's actually pretty simple. I specify payload so that I know what my data is coming in. I say that this is a grid list. I borrowed this from a sample and it's called plant list, and I override that later on, and I actually leave this here on purpose to make sure I'm aware of whether I'm using real or fake data. I get the title from my payload. I don't want a back button because this is my main screen. I don't need to number the buttons. I've got a background image, which is the soccer pitch, football pitch that you saw. Various other things you can say. And then I say, what are my list items? So what should I display? And that's actually it. And now you're probably asking at this point, but where's the actual data? Well, okay, let's go back. So we go back to our source code, and I've got a second source file here, and this is my data source 2, and this is called grid list data because I'm simple and I don't like surprises. So the data for my grid list comes in a variable called grid list data. And I've got some, here again is the football pitch that I'm showing, and then I have the title that you've seen before, and then I have a bunch of list items. And there's the text, there's my image source, which for me, I put them all on CloudFront just because it's more efficient, and then the action. And you notice they all look the same: primary source, or primary text, image source, action, primary text, image source, action. And in each case, the action is to send an event with arguments, okay? And so when I press fixtures, the argument is fixtures. When I press results, the argument is results, and so on. And when I ask for teams, which is that special one, I get teams. So it's really quite straightforward. So now let's look at what happens when you actually press one of those buttons. So we'll come back here. And so this was our grid mix handler, which painted the screen. Now we have our button handler that handles when you press a button. And again, we have this, can I handle it, and so on. But now here's my actual handler. And again, I put a fair bit of logging, and I pull some variables out because I don't like magic strings. So I get what the first argument is. And and we'll go into this in a little bit more detail in a bit, but if the first argument is one of the radio buttons, I do some interesting things. If the first argument is go back, I call go home, which just brings me back to the main screen. If the first argument is teams, I do something special, and we'll get to all of this. Otherwise, we just need to say something. So we're going to call say statistics, okay? And the statistics include which radio button is currently selected, okay? So go to say stats, and here's where we emit the actual speech. And as I say in the comment, this is just a placeholder. Right now, in the real skill, this is where all my actual business logic is. And so here I do a response, and here I'm adding a directive, and we're back to using an APLA render document directive because I want to say something, and this is just our old code from last time with noise. So that's where it says, the players with the most tackles are, and so on. So that's what happens if I do any of those, the sort of the usual case. But now let's go back and look at some of the special cases. Okay. And radio buttons are indeed a special case. And I will say, I'm really not a fan of how Alexa has structured their radio buttons. Each radio button is its own entity, and you have to tie them together, because if you click one, it doesn't automatically unselect the other ones. That's one problem. Another problem is that you can't normally click on the text. You have to click on the button itself, or it won't respond. And I find that very problematic, especially on a device that doesn't have a very big screen. You want to be able to touch the whole thing. So I decided I was just going to handle it myself. So I figured out, I get the radio button ID, and the text, and I log some information. And then here I've got, a couple of arrays, form, fixtures, results, and these are the text associated with them. And then I zip those together so I can get, a tuple back in my for loop. But essentially, I iterate over the buttons, and I say the color of the button should be selected color if the handler input radio button equals the button that I'm looping over. Otherwise, it's the unselected color. And I add a command, and this is a set value command that lets me change something that's on the screen, and then I append that. And then I set the actual value, and then if the value was true, then I remember down in this little section of code that that's the radio button that's been handled. And I set the command again, and here's where I say, okay, we'll show you that button. So this little chunk of code, in my mind, is a better replacement and what Alexa should have given us from the start, because now you can press any part of the button. This is some debugging code down here. I should probably just take out. If you say you want to go back, we have our command go home, which just renders the original grid list document. Okay. What else do we have? Oh yeah. So if you've said teams, then you go to our second page. Okay. And here's where, again, I figure out the size of the screen to figure out how I'm going to adjust the sizes of the buttons. And here I call the radio buttons document. And we we do that display, and there we go. And if you didn't pick teams, again, we're down here, we just say staffs. So let's look at that document. So this is our grid list document. Let's go to our radio buttons document. Okay. So this is just some sample data, and this shows you how it looks. And you can see how it will look on various size screens. In particular, the little round dot is an interesting screen. And there's a bunch of ways you can look at the data, but look at the document. But usually I look at it in here in the presentation language view. Let me make that a little bigger. Okay. And so we set up a radio button row so that so we get the alignment of the items. And then we iterate over the items themselves, which we're going to get from the data. And we say we want them row by row. And then for each item, I set up a radio button that you can barely even see, but I needed to use those so that I could get the radio button to work. And then we have this thing called a touch wrapper, because text in the APL is usually just descriptive. You can't touch text. It's not a responsive component, so you have to put a touch wrapper around it. And so I have a touch wrapper wrapping some text, and I have the font size, and I set the color, and so on. And then if you press it, I send an event with the radio button text and the data associated with it. And that's how in our code over here in button handler, say if the first argument is radio button text. And there's the radio button text. Okay, and here I have again so that's for the radio buttons. And here again I have grid list, and I've got a container, and then I've got an array of items. And the first item is my radio button group, and the second item is my grid list. And this looks just like the grid list from the first page, except we send different data. And that's pretty much it. So it's not a lot of total source code, but it took a long time to figure this out. And we've been talking with Amazon about maybe making the documentation a little better. Well, one of the things that I hope you can get out of this is I've shown you in a single source code, well, two source code files together, and some display templates. All of what you need to do a couple types of audio, a couple types of video, all together. And I hope you enjoy, and thank you so much. Video. If you'd like to see the source code for all of this, go to the URL on the screen, briantarbox.org/alexaskills.html. Thank you.